Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Swords and Saints, A Doctor's Journey by Robert Adams, M.D., narrated by Adam Lofbomm. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. Invictus, William Henley. Prologue. Doctor scrubs, a starched white coat, and a black stethoscope are all part of a physician's uniform. I love uniforms. Any uniform will do. Cub Scouts at 8, Boy Scouts at 11, Eagle Scout at 14, Explorer Scout at 16, U.S. Naval Academy Midshipman at 17, Naval Officer, then Army Officer. Uniforms worn with pride make you stand straighter and walk with purpose. From the Naval Academy until medical school, I wore a Navy uniform. I wore Army uniforms proudly for 18 more years, added numerous medals and badges, and retired as a Medical Corps Colonel, 06. The Army dress uniform, with all its shiny pieces, parts, bangles, and beads, is fun to wear. Uniforms with awards, badges, medals, and sashes display personal accomplishments. Boy Scout awards like the 1-mile swim, 50-mile hike, Order of the Arrow, God and Country, and Eagle Scout are saved and honored. Mine remind me of successes that I wanted and needed. The military gave me jump wings, static line, free fall, and Korean jump wings, a scuba diver silver badge, flight surgeon silver wings, and a Navy SEAL big gold eagle insignia. These acknowledged challenges taken and met. Others envied them. I loved them. Boy Scouts, summer camps, and sports gave me refuge away from a dysfunctional home life. I entered the U.S. Naval Academy at age 17. Lacrosse and wrestling had been my high school sports. Swimming was a hobby, and the academy offered all this and more, so I tried to fit in but failed. A desire for independence and control made me a square peg in a round hole. I would graduate anyway, and later discovered that these past obstacles overcome would serve me well. Hell Week in my SEAL training was 6 days of no sleep, soaking wet, freezing cold endurance that lead to extreme mental and physical exhaustion. It was hard, but not worse than I had experienced before. The Navy years were rewarding. Great times with amazing men. Parachuting, scuba diving, demolitions, weapons training, and endurance athletics made it exciting. But it was a young man's profession. I went to medical school at age 36 to keep that excitement alive. My adventures as a civilian physician began after 36 years in a military uniform, at age 55. One question that intrigued my family and friends was, why did you walk this difficult and expensive path to a second career in medicine? It was due to a search for meaning. I wanted the same sense of fulfillment and excitement that I had enjoyed as a SEAL platoon commander. Medicine was never a calling, but it was, in retrospect, a destiny. The following personal experiences helped me grow as a person and as a physician. They involve patients that trusted me, and for that, I will be forever grateful. Some make me laugh, some make me cry or say, wow. They should not die with me. Chapter 1. Primum non nocere. Primum non nocere has always been my medical mantra. Hippocrates is credited with this dictum, and it means, first, do no harm. As I reflect on 3 decades as a doctor, I'm reminded of how much fun I have had, and I'm grateful to have studied and practiced medicine later in life. Starting in my late 30s allowed me to benefit from past experiences. Younger students do 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and graduate into residency programs of 3 to 7 more years to learn their specialty. They emerge from their all-consuming educational cocoons with limited life experience. These years of learning are physically and financially exhausting, stressful, and isolated. There are few chances to experience the birth of a child, death of a loved one, or a job you hate. Patients will present for help with all these issues. Younger physicians are less than fully prepared. Education does not help a physician understand loneliness, alcoholism, child abuse, bad bosses, financial crisis, addiction, or poverty. In the age of the internet, there is a vast amount of information for those able to access it. An inquisitive person can often figure out what is wrong with themselves before seeking a doctor's advice and confirmation. Doctor is a title that establishes credibility with persons in need or distress. That credibility comes with heavy responsibility, as disease and psychiatric illnesses are everywhere. Airplanes bring infections. Water and food carry and spread germs, and alcohol, smoking, and sugar cause severe illnesses. Young and old often die too soon. After decades of learning from my patients, I have become a teacher. Doctors, physician's assistants, PA, and nurse practitioners, NP, come for advice. Do I cut the abscess? Does she need to be in the hospital? Is this EKG showing ischemia? What should I do? Will this medication cause harm? I have the experience to change lives. To ignore my advice can be harmful, a sin against the institution of healing. Most physicians are quite good at what they do, but success is limited by what they know, and especially by what they don't know. Knowledge grows with experience, and without constant striving to keep current, a physician's knowledge becomes outdated. Technology bypasses some. Medical advances blow past what they were taught. There is an increasing number of physician extenders providing medical care. These physician assistants and nurse practitioners provide needed access in a world with a growing population and not enough doctors. I regularly encountered misdiagnoses, unnecessary tests, misuse of drugs, or other problems caused by well-intentioned but undertrained medical providers. Urgent care clinics are popping up, manned only by physician extenders. A supervising physician might have oversight responsibility for 40 to 50 extenders. Some states do not even limit the number of supervised physician extenders. It is a system doomed to failure. Our healthcare insurance plans are inefficient and unfair. Insurance companies force providers to use medicines based on price and not on effectiveness. A better way is required, and inevitable. I have observed doctors practicing in Iraq, the cradle of civilization, and other countries. In 2003, I met Iraqi doctors who had taken advantage of their country's free 6-year medical education taught in English. The British had instituted this program in the 1920s, after World War I. Following medical school and an intern year, doctors in Iraq would serve 12 years as a general medical practitioner in outlying areas. They could return to a residency program and learn a specialty after serving, and were paid about $100 a month for those first 12 years. There were no nurses or physician extenders. They lived with their parents or in small clinics far from bigger cities with limited access to medications or specialists. When the U.S. brought more freedom to Iraq, there had been zero access to outside education for the previous 25 years. Saddam Hussein had made it illegal for doctors to leave the country, as they often never returned. The internet was forbidden, and libraries had few books. These doctors learned at the bedside, the honored Hippocratic method. Teachers passed on what they could from memory or notebooks they carried. Iraq had once been the shining star in the Middle East medical world. But after years of suppression, they practiced the way they had years before. "Why do you do this?" I inquired of the doctors. The answer was almost always the same. "I want to help my people." I realized that these physicians were much like our American frontier doctors. In the early 1900s, U.S. doctors did everything. They were obstetricians and surgeons and family doctors. They were paid with pennies and chickens. They did it because they wanted to help others. They were honored and respected, and often did their work for free. It was a calling in the highest sense of the word. Technology continues to make each day more exciting and productive. It also makes it more dangerous. There are more treatment and testing options, and we can do so much more. But there is so much we should not do, just because we can. Pray that physicians continue to seek the wisdom to know the difference. Primum non nocere. Chapter 2. Such Trust. "Knife to Dr. Adams," ordered the attending physician. I reached out my scrubbed, sterile, glove-covered hand towards the surgical assistant. She slapped a shiny steel scalpel expertly onto my palm, and the sterile blade flashed in the bright lights. A soft rubber plop was all we heard. It was my moment. I would cut a deep, smile-shaped incision into the bulging abdomen of a living person. I would dissect and manually tear through the muscles and layers of tissue to the uterus, and open that now much enlarged organ with another, smaller incision. Out of the bleeding set of wounds would emerge a slippery baby covered with a film of whitish grease. I would lift a squirming child out of the warm, wet hole, cut the cord, and announce, "It's a boy." A new life would begin today. As the nurse slapped my palm with the tools of our trade, she watched my hands for a tremor, and my eyes for fear. She knew this was my first time as the primary surgeon. What she saw was steady hands and a look of awe, but I was shaking inside. How have I earned her trust? I wondered, glancing over my paper mask to the anxious face of the now pain-free woman. The epidural anesthesia drip in her back left her numb from the waist down. In addition, the anesthesiologist was adding a steady flow of anti-anxiety medicine to her IV fluids. She was aware, chemically calm, and watching. "We are going to start now," I announced while looking directly at her shiny blue eyes. Mine were bright blue also, and concentrating. Do she and her husband know how humbled I am by their belief in my newly developing skills? If they could hear my thoughts now, I wondered. Would they tell me to stop? I was pretty sure they would. A sterile blue paper drape was placed neatly over her tummy. The drape had a peel-away piece of waxed paper protecting the clear adhesive window over her abdomen. The waxed paper was removed as we unfolded the drape into place and handed the upper edge of the blue paper to the anesthesiologist. He attached it to 2 poles at the head of the bed, creating a sterile barrier. He and the dad could stand behind it and listen. The surgical area was not visible. Watching could be most disturbing. I placed the scalpel at the left lower edge of a plastic-covered pumpkin-sized bulge at a planned 90-degree angle. My hand pressed down until I could see and feel the outer skin layers separate. The skin was brown from the pre-surgical betadine paint job. The temperature-controlled, frosty room reeked of disinfectant. Bright lights glared above, and with one single deliberate movement, I cut deeply and accurately along the path I had mapped in my head. The result was a bright red, curved incision, stretching 10 inches along the bottom of the brown, betadine-stained abdomen. Dark red bubbles of blood oozed up along the incision, and the thick liquid turned shiny and more brightly red as it mixed with the oxygen in the air. The operating room technician dabbed at the incision. "Nice job, doctor," observed the tech with amazement in her voice. The wide-eyed husband peeked over the paper drape. He could not see the procedure underway, and his eyes, peeking over his paper mask, showed confusion and expectation of his son's imminent arrival. I remembered how I had experienced the births of my 2 children, long before going to medical school. I had been confused and lost. I wanted to reassure him, but this was not my operating room. It belonged to my mentor, and she concentrated on me. 4 people were watching, and we all wore looks of alert concentration. My decision to go to medical school had come late, at 30 years old, when my son was only 2 months old. My hair had been thinning since college, and there were strands of gray. A daughter was in our future when I came home and asked my wife Jerry for permission to go to medical school. I wanted adventure again, and a greater sense of fulfillment. I worked full-time after finishing my MBA degree. No badge or button earned, and had gone to work for the corporate world. This was a place without morals or excitement, where making money was the only objective. Weekends were spent doing Navy Reserves training. But this was not enough to meet my need for a sense of fulfillment. If we decide to do this, it'll take a couple of years to get accepted. I'll have to go back to school at night after work, and if I get in, we'll have to sell everything and borrow money. We'll be poor for 7 years of medical school and residency, I observed, with hope and reservation. She was 5 foot 4 inches tall, intelligent, blonde, and beautiful. The woman of my dreams. Her love for children and animals was why I needed her as my wife, because I knew our children would be raised with compassion, She was feeding our son a bottle as she contemplated a response. She knew I was not happy in my current job, where making money was my only task. Money has no ethics. To make $1, I had to get someone else to give it to me. When I commanded elite warriors parachuting, diving, shooting, and blowing things up in defense of our country, there was seldom a bad day. I would go to bed at night, distressed that I had to sleep 8 hours before I could wake up and do it all again. I wanted to feel good again. Like that. Sweetie, we were poor and happy when we got married. And we can be poor and happy again. I want you to come home and hug our kids. Anything less is unacceptable. You should try, she said with encouragement in her sparkling blue eyes. Besides, you probably won't get in at your age, she added with a bright smile, shifting our infant son to her other arm. She stood up straight, with a swimmer's shoulders and an athletic build. Her smile could light up any room. Go for it anyway. Unbeknownst to either of us, our daughter was just beginning to flutter in her mommy's tummy. 3.5 years later, I arrived at the Bowman Gray School of Medicine, Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with a wife, 2 children, and everything we owned in our car and a small moving van. I was 36 years old. But this day, in the operating room, I gently lifted a newborn upward for all to see. It's a boy, I announced proudly, and my voice cracked a bit. Until the 1900s, cesarean section deliveries were reserved as a last-ditch effort to save a baby when the mother died or was dying from childbirth. Mothers did not survive, in part due to a belief that the physician should leave the uterus open to drain the evil humors. Physicians believed that sutures would cause infections and that the uterus would contract back to normal and close by itself. This erroneous belief led to universal abdominal infection, sepsis, and death. In the 1870s, surprisingly in the United States, a report came from frontier doctors that they had been sewing up the uterus with silver wire after C-section deliveries, and their patients had lived. Their logic was reasonable. Since the mother will certainly die, why not sew up the incision and see what happens? They reasoned. It was scoffed at and ignored by medical teaching centers. Almost 10 years later, these institutions of learning repeated the experiment to prove that the paper sent to them by these frontier doctors was wrong. The women lived. Anesthesia using ether came along in 1846, but was seldom used in childbirth. Midwives sometimes quoted the Bible, Genesis 3:16, as requiring women to suffer in childbirth to atone for Eve's sin. This false biblical prohibition lessened when Queen Victoria used chloroform for the births of her 2 children in 1853 and 1857. Thank God. As a medical doctor, I have known the face of adversity. I have seen death and dying, suffering and sorrow. I also remember the plight of students overwhelmed by their studies. Russell M. Nelson. Getting there. Chapter 3. Dad and Dying. I held my dad's hand as he died. His passing was peaceful. And, except for my mother, who held the other hand and kept sobbing the words, "I love you," it was quiet. The breathing machine kept inflating his lungs, and it was difficult to believe he was dead. But the cardiac monitor above the bed had registered his last heartbeat. I had watched the peaks get farther apart until they stopped. It was then that I answered my mom, who was asking when we would know that he was gone. "We know now, Mom." His heart had stopped. He was only 63 years old, and he never knew that I later went to medical school. Dad was admitted to the hospital 4 days before his death for low back pain. He had been in pain for months, but as far as we knew, he never sought a doctor's help. They had diagnosed his lung cancer some time before, but he did not tell us. It was terminal at the time of diagnosis. They planned nothing medical, except regular checkups. He had lived a hard life. He smoked a lot and drank even more. He flew fighters for the Navy and was a test pilot in his heart even after he flew a desk. He gave up alcohol with the help of Alcoholics Anonymous 12 years before he died, and he often left the house to meet with someone who called for help with drinking. A strange thing about his last year was his response to our concern when we would see him grimace in pain. He would refuse to see a doctor. "I'll let you know when it's time to go," he would reply. We all knew something was wrong, and he knew too. One day he was unable to move. "It's time to go," he stated. During his first day in the hospital, he instructed me about his estate papers and told me where to find his insurance and official documents. It seemed silly. The doctors disclosed very little, and an autopsy was against Dad's wishes. The last few days with my father were a mixture of surprise and amazement. He would awaken from vivid dreams about flying and tell me about them. Present-day astronauts had been his wingmen in squadrons past. He was reliving his best adventures with them. The peace on his face as he told of the dreams was confused by my presence at an older age. In his mind, I should have been younger or somewhere else. They moved him to intensive care, and he fought to stay alive so the family could say goodbye. It was a real battle, and one evening his heart stopped. "Don't do again. Hurt," read his note, after shocking him back to life. "Please let me go. It's okay," he scribbled. He was intubated and could not speak. We all admitted that the end was near. Unobserved, I baptized him. I laid my hand on his head and made him welcome in heaven. He had never been a religious man, but I discovered later that he had learned to pray. I kissed him. I did that for me, as we had never kissed. I had wanted to kiss and hug him, but that task for his 3 children was delegated to our mom. Dad died as he had lived, strong and without emotion. As his heart slowed, his eyes rolled back, and we closed his eyelids. His hands were cold, and the monitor recorded the last heartbeat. A full minute passed as I fought back the tears. His eyes opened, pupils contracted, and he looked over at my mom. I watched their eyes meet and hold for what seemed like an eternity, but was only a few seconds. Then they closed again. It was clear to my mom what had happened. He had made one last monumental effort to say, "I hear you, and I love you too. Goodbye." He taught me much as a child, but he taught me more with his passing. I suddenly knew that death was an inevitable part of life. It was not necessarily difficult or painful to die, and an overwhelming peace follows monumental suffering. These lessons help me now with patient care and family coping issues. They give me a better perspective on life. I learned that death was in the future for all, and it helped distinguish the important from the trivial. I saw the power of the mind in Dad's farewell glance. I learned with certainty that there was a soul. It lived on, somewhere outside the body left behind. Thanks, Dad, for these final lessons that you never intended to teach me. And guess what? I'm a doctor now. You'd be proud. The North Carolina Medical Journal published this chapter when I was a medical student. It was the winning student essay that year. Chapter 4. The Decision. Our family moved every 3 years during my formative years. We were in Yokosuka, Japan when President Kennedy was shot and killed. It was a Boy Scout Jamboree day. Our troop produced a display on first aid, and I staffed the booth. My uniform was ironed and creased, and my merit badge sash had 15 neatly aligned badges of various colors and designs. My pocket rank patch was for First Class Scout, with an eagle, an American flag shield, and 2 stars. At the bottom it read, "Be prepared." "What do you do when someone has a seizure and is biting his tongue?" probed a wandering scout. "You take your belt off and put it between his teeth," I responded, thinking instinctively. "Oh, that would work," he responded, impressed. It surprised me I came up with an answer. It was not in my first aid book. I made Eagle Scout at age 14. I loved scouting, as it got me out of a dysfunctional household and gave me a sense of accomplishment. When I had done all I could as a Boy Scout, I formed an explorer post. Keep the fun alive was my mantra then. I was curious about medical stuff, so I asked the military hospital in Pensacola, Florida, to sponsor our troop. We had access to the inner workings of hospital-based medical care. Then we moved again. The family went to Belgium, and I went to a boarding school in Maryland. It was 1967, and I had decided to become a SEAL. Reader's Digest had published an article announcing the existence of this previously unknown secret organization. Super Commandos of the Wetlands had struck me straight in the heart. I would be a frogman. If joining the Navy was necessary to do that, then following in our family's footsteps made sense. I would go to the Naval Academy like Dad and Granddad. At the Naval Academy, my grades were average. Graduation, not academic excellence, was the goal. But one class captured my imagination. I earned a 4.0 grade in biology and loved it. My professor enjoyed staying after class to help me revel in it more. This extra effort would factor into future life decisions. I did not get one of the 3 slots for SEAL training offered to our class on service selection night. Selection opportunities were based on class rank, and I was not high enough. The 3 available slots were gone when my number came up. I would need to drive a destroyer first. An older World War II-era destroyer, USS Hamner, DD-718 in San Francisco, awaited me. Launched in November 1945, she hid lots of ancient rust under her layers of gray paint. I had 30 days of paid vacation to use before reporting. So I joined 12 classmates in Key West, Florida, for underwater swimmer school. We would all become Navy scuba divers. One of our instructors was a SEAL. "Sir, you're having too much fun here. Have you ever thought of becoming a Navy SEAL?" he queried. I smiled at the question. 18 months later, in 1974, I began basic underwater demolition SEAL school. I graduated as one of the 11 men out of the 70 that started, and was the senior officer remaining. In 1978, the post-Vietnam War period, the military shrank, and funding evaporated. I explored other options and transferred to the reserve teams so I could get an MBA and try my hand at business. I met the love of my life in her hometown of Harrisonburg, Virginia, while starting my first business and going to school at James Madison University. 3 years later, we were married and moved to Washington, D.C. I finished my degree and found a good job. We had a son 18 months later. 3 years after our son's birth, I was accepted to medical school. Let the good times roll. Laissez les bons temps rouler. Jerry and the 2 kids came along for the ride. As we were driving to our new adventure, I asked my wife why she had married me, and I honestly wanted to know the answer. We were starting over again. I reminded her that I had barely a nickel to my name when I proposed. Her answer tickles me to this day. "I married you for your potential," she responded with a smile. Chapter 5. Childbirth. My first witnessed childbirth occurred long before I ever thought about medical school. It involved my wife and our son. We had been married for 2 years. My wife was 28 years old and pregnant, and we were doing all the right things. We exercised often, ate a proper diet, and drank no alcohol. We attended the hospital's recommended Lamaze classes. Our class had 6 couples, all due about the same time, and there were 3 classes left to participate in when Jerry phoned me. "My water broke," she stated calmly. "What are you talking about? You're not due yet," I stammered. It was 1 a.m. on Saturday, and I had just climbed into bed at the officers' quarters. I was scheduled for a weekend of Navy training, with our home now 4 hours away. The doctor had assured us that Jerry was not showing any signs of early labor risk. We had an animated discussion that began with my disbelief and ended with her correcting my understanding of the situation. "Sweetheart, trust me, the puddle of fluid at my feet right now could have no other cause. I'm not contracting much right now, so why don't you get a few hours of sleep and head back after the sun is up? I'll call you if labor starts for real," she stated, with a touch of excitement. After a hurried phone call to my commanding officer, I slid back into bed and willed myself to sleep. There would be an adventure in the morning with 4 hours racing back home. My speed exceeded the posted limit as I rehearsed the story that I would tell the officer if I got stopped. I was unclear what would happen next, as we had not gotten that far in our Lamaze classes. Contractions were in an irregular pattern, and her doctor said it was okay to wait until I got back to go to the labor deck if the contractions remained light and intermittent. Labor deck is the name for the maternity ward in a military hospital. Each previous doctor visit had included a urinalysis, a blood pressure check, and an ultrasound fetal.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?